All right, so good morning. Yeah, so what we're going to do is look at creating this kind of bokeh effect with particles. Now, they are just going to be particles, so they're not going to have a lot of detail, and I'm thinking the ones in the background I should have pushed back even further just to get even more of a kind of a randomized blur effect. These ones got a little bit close. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to create some particle spheres. So you're partially right. We are going to be kind of creating spheres. We're going to be allowing them to kind of animate themselves, though, because it's going to be through dynamics. All right. So I'm just going to make sure I'm on frame 0, and I'm going to increase my timeline to something a little bit higher in the beginning. This will kind of allow me to just kind of place everything. I'm also going to just go into a different camera. This is my rendered camera. So I just have a simple tree set. This is just a Quixel Megascans background I had downloaded at the beginning of the summer. That kind of looks like a cool outdoor kind of environment for me to use. Let me see. Do I have... and also let me just reduce some of these settings here. So let me go back down to something reasonable. And I don't need GI on, so let me just turn that off. All right. And what's this? That's just the connection. So I don't know if you saw the video on adding in the distance node to control the camera's focal distance. But to get the bokeh working properly, we do have to use depth of field on our camera. So if I go to view the selected camera here, so I am using this. So I did record a video on Thursday for Group A. I haven't put it up on Slate, but it is in the resources video folder where all the videos are being stored. Because you might want to control this distance with a distance dimension node. I also have another video that's a little bit longer that I recorded 2 years ago, or last year, I guess, on how to set this up too. So I'll attach that. It doesn't take very long, but just to keep this video short, and in case you saw this part already, I'll just skip over it. But essentially, we just need to use the distance dimension tool, which is basically just here under Create, Measure Tools, Distance Tool. You technically don't have to set it up dynamically driving it. You just need to have these two locators. One of the two locators, it doesn't matter which one, needs to be point constrained to your camera. So if I add it to, say, this scene over here, my second camera, so you select your camera first, any of those two locators second, and then go constrain point. What that does is it snaps the one end to the camera, and then the other locator that didn't get constrained, this is just going to go to where you want the focus to be. So if you have your character maybe standing on this log here, for example, we just want to place that where the character might be. And you can see here there's a value here that's changing as my camera changes. So what this is doing is it's showing me the distance between my camera and where the focal interest is going to be, where that locator is there. And basically that value, so 66 essentially, would then just go into this depth of field focal distance setting. So if I look at this now, so right now this is at 5, so it's really shallow depth of field. It's right near the camera. So if I put in, what was it again, 60, you can see that now, yeah, the focus area is going to be around here. Now for a nice dramatic bokeh, though, you're going to want to reduce the f-stop. So the lower the f-stop, the more light you're letting into the camera. So basically it's opening your camera lens up all the way. A lot of really high-end lenses will have like an f-stop of 1, and that just allows for really buttery kind of bokeh to come through. And then we just want to probably play around with this region scale just to bring in an area a little bit more in focus around the character. One might work perfectly, it might be too shallow still. You don't want to go too high, because if I go, say, 10, then everything's in focus, right? Because it's creating 10 units on either side of that locator, and that big area now is going to be in focus. So that's going to reduce the bokeh, because basically the bokeh will only take place in areas that are out of focus. So let me just go and put this back down to 1. All right, so this is the camera I'm going to work in, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an N particle, and I'm going to emit some of these N particle spheres around the area. I'm not where my character is, just kind of in the foreground and background, just to kind of create this kind of subtle, kind of floaty effect. Now to do this, we're going to go into our effects module, and I'm also going to switch over to my effects tab here, because there's a button I want to use just to see how my placement's going, which is this guy right here, interactive playback. This is a little bit different than this playback button down here, because this one allows us to move our dynamics around in real time while it's playing, and this one doesn't. So this one's actually more beneficial for us. I also might want to make my ground a collision object, just so my particles don't go through it. So to do that, I'll do it first. I'll go to N cloth, and I'm just going to create a passive collider. Passive collider doesn't do anything to your geometry. Anything, if it's rigged or bound, has skin weights on it, can be a passive collider. Basically, any kind of N system dynamics, so nucleus-driven dynamics, will just collide with that. And I think I've already made this a collider from when I was testing this out. So you should see a, you know what, maybe I deleted that. So let me just do it again. So N cloth, make passive, there we go. So it has an N rigid shape, a nucleus, and a time. I'm going to go to this nucleus. I don't really want these things kind of falling down. I'm going to zero out the gravity, just so that there's no real kind of gravity bringing them down to the ground. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my N particles. So here we go, N particles. And we're going to create an emitter. So an emitter basically is an object that spits out the particles. Before doing this, though, what I'm going to do is just go to my create options and just make sure I'm set to either balls or points. I'm going to use balls, but I'm almost thinking maybe points might be better. But anyhow, let's go with balls. And we're going to go back to create emitter. And that creates this little guy right here. This looks like a little sphere. Now this is a non-renderable thing that basically spits out our particles. So let me just make sure that this is going to be kind of around the height of my camera, my other camera, which is right over here somewhere. And essentially what I want to do is just drag this around in a circle like this, maybe once or twice, just to emit particles as I do that. So let's see what happens first. So I'm going to push the play button, and I'm just going to move my particles around. Now you can see as I'm doing this, my particles might be just a little bit, small maybe. And let me see, what does it look like over here? And they might be a little bit too, maybe too in focus. I'm getting a bit of a big clump right here too. So what I might consider doing, go back to frame 0, just resets everything, is I'm going to start out of frame. And let me just make sure I'm getting a nice angle on that camera. Okay, so before I do it this time, I'm just going to go in and change some of my emitter settings. So I might want to have my particles emitting further from my emitter. So let me change my maximum distance to maybe 5 units. So if I push play now, again I'm using that interactive playback, when they emit, they are going to emit with a greater distance. That one's actually not too bad. Yeah, and I can maybe do one or two. Another thing I might want to do is do some change my speed up a little bit, and the random speed. So that's going to randomly kind of place things as well. So let me go back to my 0 frame again, first frame, and I'm going to do this again. So interactive playback, and I'm just going to go around and maybe just a little bit more in the background here, and back around, and then stop. Cool. Yeah, I'm not really getting too many in the foreground. You know, that may or may not be a good thing. But let me just push play one more time. I'm going to do one more round of this. So I'm not going to reset it this time. I'm just going to continue from where I am. So I'm going to push that interactive playback button. And I'm just going to draw a little bit more in through here, in through the background. And I think that's good. Alright, so let's say that is kind of what I want. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze these guys out. So I'm going to select the particle shape now. So there we go. So if you just click on the particles, they're not individual, they're treated as one big shape in this what's called a bounding box. So there's actually a box around the outer limits of the particles. So you can select a particle, it just selects this big kind of bounding box here. And what we're going to do is go first of all into particle shape, and I'm going to switch my particle size to something a little bit smaller. 0.1, 0.05. You want to go a little bit smaller. The ones in the background will still get nice kind of bokeh on them, even though you can barely see them at the moment. And if I were to render this at this point, so if I were to start an IPR going, like a redshift IPR, there we go. So you can see, yeah, I don't know if I'm actually seeing any particles, to be honest. I guess this is them. I guess that's them. That looks pretty cool. So yeah, I can see them. They're rendering. I wasn't sure they'd render without the redshift material on them, but they do seem to be rendering. And they seem to be taking on some of the color of the particles, which is good too. So yeah, let me just go in and reduce my bokeh, or reduce the depth of field, I should say. So let me go into, and I apologize in advance, my computer, the fans started going once I do these IPRs, so you might hear some fan sounds shortly, but let me see here. So select camera, and I'm just going down here, and I'm just going to increase my f-stop value. So remember, the higher that f-stop value, the more we're going to see in focus. Yeah, so this is cool. So it is actually taking on the color of these particles. So we actually don't need to use a redshift material on them then. So let me reduce this back down to maybe not 30, let's go maybe 3. So that looks pretty good. Cool. So if I wanted to change the color of these, what we could do is go under the particle shape node again. So I just selected that bounding box. You can also select it right here, particle 1 in the outliner. And let's look for color. I'm looking for particle color. I know there's like a million things here. So shading. So right now this is going between red and blue. So you know, you could choose any color. Just kind of randomizes the particle colors here. So let me go between yellow and blue. That's kind of a neat change there. Alright, that looks pretty good. And then we just have to make them move. So I want to, now be careful though, because if I go back to 0, I'd have to reset them all up again, because they'll disappear. They'll get re-emitted from our emitter. Instead though, what I want to do is I want to freeze them in this position, even just maybe get rid of the emitter altogether, or we could select the emitter. I think this is it, right? That's a light, is that? Here's the emitter here. What I can do is I can just turn off my particle rate. That just means it won't emit any more particles. There goes the fan. And then what we can do then is, with our particles selected, we can kind of lock this in as our starting point, and then we can add in some random motion onto it. So to lock this in, what we need to do then is go to, and again this is under our effects module, we're going to go over to, where is it? I'm looking for solvers, fields and solvers, here it is, and the initial state right in the middle. So what initial state does is it just resets the starting point for the particles at frame 0. So I'm going to set for selected. So now if I go back to frame 0, they'll be in this exact same position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my time range now to 240. Now one thing I didn't mention, and maybe I should have mentioned it in the beginning because things might be exploding possibly. Just make sure your playback speed is set to either play every frame free or play every frame maximum real time, one of these two. Real time actually skips frames to be real time, so it might cause your particles to behave erratically, or it could, worst case, like freeze your computer. Alright, so now if I were to push play, like just the regular play button, let's see what happens. And there they go. They're just kind of flying off. Now they might be moving too fast, so this is where we're going to have to tweak some settings now. So the first thing we want to do is go up to our dynamic properties. And there's these ones here, conserve and dynamic weight. Conserve, if I were to zero that down and push play, you can see the particles no longer move. Basically this tells us how fast our particles are going to lose energy. So in real world conserve is like 0.998. So let me go back to the beginning. So you can see they're moving just a tiny little bit, but not too much. Let's go 0.99. Oh, 0.999. Oh, let's see, that's too much. So let's go 0.8. Let's see. Let me go back to the beginning again in a second. You know what? Maybe we'll just have conserve off all the way. That way they'll just start. And we just want to kind of direct how they'll move. Now there's a couple ways we can do this. One, we could try using a field. So with my particles selected, and under, again the same thing as before, fields and solvers, we could add a turbulence field. Let's try doing this first. And if this doesn't work, I'll do what I did before and just use the nucleus itself. But let's try this. Turbulence. And I don't think there is, let me see, unless they've added this. Let me just check the particle shape here for a second to see if they've actually added in any kind of dynamic properties. And bear with me for 1 second. Yeah, I don't see anything, so we'll do this. So let me just push play now. So I'm not really seeing any effect of the turbulence. Let's go into that emitter, or that modifier, and I'm going to increase my frequency. Is there anything happening now? Maybe increase this. Increase, yeah, nothing's going on. Yeah, nothing's happening, so let's not use that. That one's useless. Alright, so with the way we've kind of approached this. So what we're going to do is just kind of what I did before. I'm just going to go into the nucleus itself, right here. And I'm just going to modify this section right here, the air density and wind speed. So basically, with air density and wind speed, we can basically cause our particles to move. Well, here they are over here. Am I in the wrong camera? Maybe that's why I didn't notice it before. Obviously I think that's too. I am in the wrong camera. So I wonder if our turbulence was actually doing anything. I just didn't notice it. Yeah, let me stop this for a second here. So air density and wind speed. So that's obviously blowing them all in one direction. So I probably don't need the wind speed to be that high. But what I want to do though is add in some wind noise. So if I do this, now that's a little bit too much. Now that's going to be a little bit too jittery probably. Yeah, you know what, I'm going to try, let me just zero that out. Let me just try the turbulence one more time because I feel like I was in the wrong camera. Alright, so let's do this one more time here. Select this. We're going to go to fields. We're going to add a turbulence field. And yeah, I'm still not really seeing anything here. Let's change my magnitude to something crazy. Oh yeah, so now it's working. There we go. This is what I want to see. So that they behave a little bit more like fireflies. This is a little bit better. Some seem to be moving a little bit more than others. Oh, cool. So it looks like a little bit of a random kind of firefly-esque kind of patterns that are shifting around, so that's kind of neat. This one kind of I don't know how fast, so if you want something a little bit more mystical and whatnot, you probably want these things to just be kind of hovering around, but not too much probably. Something like that is probably good. All right, we'll go with that. That looks pretty good. So again, that's using the magnitude and then tweaking these settings. But you might want to crank that using the turbulence field, cranking the magnitude to something really high. My setting was just way too low initially, and I didn't really see anything going on. But I think that's going to be good. I'm almost wanting to do a render test now, maybe with a slightly moving camera, perhaps. I wonder what that looks like. Here, let me just do this. So select camera, and let me see, this is where maybe I'll end up, and this is where I'll begin, something like this maybe. And we'll see how that goes. Looks pretty flat though, like that. Maybe I'll just do a slight push in. So let me just start the camera here. Actually, start the camera here. I'll just do a slight push in. And maybe even rotate it a bit further. Alright. So let's see what happens with the bokeh. So I'm going to just do a quick render of this now. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Alright, it's not too bad. Alright, so just remember the ones closer to camera will be bigger, and the ones more in the area of focus will be a little bit more formed and smaller. So if you want to keep things a little bit bigger, when you're creating your initial particles, don't have them so close to where the character is going to be or the area of focus is going to be. And the ones off in the background are looking pretty good, and it's the same thing, right? The ones closer to camera will be smaller and more in focus, and the ones further away will be a little bit more out of focus, but I think that's not too bad. So I'm going to do a render test. I'll post this video as is though, and hopefully this will be helpful. So let me stop the recording now.